Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker today, Diane Kresh. Many of you know Diane. I've got a really very interesting bio for her as well. But in the interest of time, let's get to what's really, let's do the bio. So, Diane was born in Lakehurst, New Jersey, but raised in Arlington. She attended Tuckahoe, Williamsburg, and Yorktown. She is the mother of 2 sons, Matt and Nate, and wife of Colleen Donnelly. She's an avid photographer, collage artist, choral singer, and reader. And you love live theater. A lifelong New York Yankees fan who's still not over the 2004 collapse to the Boston Red Sox. As a child, she revered Johnny Carson and Lily Tomlin. And she recently developed a passion for the outdoors thanks to woodsy wife Colleen. She loves working in Arlington, and she is happy to be here. Now, without further delay, Diane.
I seem to have run in a great circle and met myself again on the starting line. Jeanette Winterson, oranges are not the only fruit. When Hope asked me some months ago if I would speak at the county's Pride Month celebration, I said yes before I took the time to think about it. She quickly added that I should make the story personal, and only then did her invitation give me pause. When I told my wife, Colleen Donnelly, that I'd been asked to speak, she immediately responded with, "Of course, your story is the story of coming out late in life." Okay, I thought, that's helpful. But it wasn't until I told my coworker, Ann Gable, and she said, "Oh, great, I'd love to hear your story," that I realized I had never actually told my story to anyone, and I wasn't even sure what my story was. As I stand here today, you can probably guess what happened. But what you don't know is how I came to be standing here. For as science fiction writer Ursula Le Guin wrote in The Left Hand of Darkness, it's good to have an end to journey toward, but it's the journey that matters in the end. So here goes. Although my coming out is indeed a later in life story, the contours of the plot began to take form much earlier. As a child, I preferred my brother's little green plastic army men to dolls. I played softball. In high school, I was president of the Thespian Honor Society. And perhaps most telling of all, I loved Judy Garland. As I gave these examples, some of you laughed. And perhaps you laughed because what I named are stereotypical behaviors we associate with being gay. The truth is, gays don't have a lock on these behaviors. Plenty of straight women play softball. Just ask Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan. But your response did reveal the power and the danger of stereotypes, those cognitive shortcuts that categorize, label, and allow us to make assumptions and to judge others in ways that can be harmful. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before there was a coming out, there was a coming of age, and I'm a product of my time and place. I started elementary school in 1960, culturally speaking, light years before the Martin Luther King March on Washington, the sexual revolution, the anti-Vietnam War protests, Stonewall, the ERA. It was a time of established norms for girls and boys, how they were expected to behave, dress, talk, wear their hair, what professions they could aspire to. And these norms were reinforced in the classrooms, on the playgrounds, in magazines, on television, and in movies. Boys could grow up to be President of the United States, and girls could grow up to be, well, never mind. I was an athletic girl, pre-Title IX, which makes me sound really old. And thanks to my late father and the countless hours we spent playing catch, I never threw a baseball like a girl, yet had few opportunities to participate in organized team sports. For those of you who are runners, it was the pre-sanctioned era of the Boston Marathon, when women could run the race but could not be credited. Some of you may have seen a famous photo of marathon runner Catherine Switzer, whose race bib was grabbed by an official as he attempted to pull her out of the race. Fortunately, her boyfriend, who was running alongside of her, intervened, and she finished that race, but would have to wait a few more years to become an official entrant. I mention sports because they're now understood to be among the best and healthiest ways for boys and girls to learn to take risks, lose their fear of failure, and build resilience and self-confidence. In the early 1970s, when I was starting high school, women's studies programs were beginning to appear on college campuses. As you might imagine, such programs were considered threatening to the established order, i.e., white, middle-class, heterosexual men. So threatening, in fact, that Pat Robertson, chairman of the Christian Broadcasting Network and one-time Republican candidate for president, wrote in a fundraising letter, "The feminist agenda is not about equal rights for women. It is about a socialist, anti-family political movement that encourages women to leave their husbands, kill their children, practice witchcraft, destroy capitalism, and become lesbians." There was no Ellen on television. No L word. One of the first movies that had any hint of a lesbian plot was The Children's Hour, which I remember seeing on late-night television. It's a dark, slightly shrill movie based on a Lillian Hellman play in which the two headmistresses of a girls' school are falsely accused by one of the students of engaging in an affair. Mayhem ensues and their reputations are ruined. Ironically, the word lesbian was never uttered in the film, and there was no demonstrative sexual contact between the two women. Yet, even the movie poster just had the word different printed next to pen and ink portraits of the stars. Yet an abnormal and shameful relationship between the two women was implied, and the movie ends with one of the women hanging herself. Not the attractive femme played by Audrey Hepburn, but the dowdy, plaid flannel robe wearing Shirley MacLaine. In spite of the film's opaqueness, I got the underlying message. Don't be different. Because to be different meant to be marginalized, ostracized. Fast forward to the married years. After college, I married someone I had met in college, and within a few years got unmarried. I married a second time a few years later, lived in a house on Capitol Hill, had 2 children. So far, pretty conventional. So what did I know, and when did I know it? In high school, a classmate told me he thought I was a dyke. I don't remember how the subject came up, nor do I believe he was intending to be hurtful when he said it. I think he was curious and wanted confirmation of what he had guessed to be true. I had no idea what the word meant. I was unbelievably naive about such things, and I had to look it up in the dictionary. What? No way. That's not me. Whatever I was doing to come across that way, I needed to stop. But that was just it. What was it? My voice? My sense of humor? The way I walked, dressed, carried myself? My skill in throwing a baseball? Whatever it was, it didn't matter. Fit in, I said to myself. Be like the other girls. Try and look like the other girls. Don't be yourself. Although I repeated these mantras often, they didn't stop the colleague at work from speculating that the only reason I'd gotten married was to have children. I was highly sensitive to any suggestion that I wasn't 100% heterosexual, so much so that I once stopped speaking to a male colleague because he called me a Swiss Army knife type of girl. When I look back through the years, I remember having crushes on women, and women had occasionally hit on me. But I had pushed those feelings and experiences away, didn't share them with anyone, and certainly didn't act on them. I kept their potential meaning hidden, buried, especially to myself. and married family life might have continued undisturbed until something happened that caused me to confront an inconvenient truth. In late 2001, my husband, David Kresh, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer. He had surgery followed by radiation therapy, and for the first year or so following treatment, his health was stable and follow-up visits to his doctor encouraging. Family life returned to normal. But while David behaved as if he had beaten cancer, I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. That happened in mid-2004, when test results confirmed a recurrence of the cancer, and with it the beginning of an unremitting decline that ended with his death in September 2006. This roughly 2-year period of time in our lives was truly awful, scary, uncertain, exhausting, to such an extent that my older son, Matt, said that our family put the fun in dysfunction. Seeing David lose first himself and then his life to disease was paradoxically a cue to me to begin reevaluating mine. The choice before me was both simple and difficult. I could either continue to repress my feelings and attractions for women for the sake of preserving the sense of self I had lived with for more than 50 years, or I could acknowledge those feelings and reveal the person I knew myself to be. David's cancer and death did not make me a lesbian. But his death was a vivid reminder that life is a gift that can be returned. Every moment I spent protecting myself from myself was keeping me from answering the question, who am I? It was time to find out. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. Yogi Berra. The first person I came out to in my year of living courageously was my doctor during my annual physical. Her response was to lecture me about the dangers of navel piercing. I assured her that it had not occurred to me to get a ring in my navel, nor did I have any plans to get a tattoo. But I had bleached my hair blonde and had started dressing in black all the time. Goth at 50. I know, what was I thinking? I also read a lot. I dusted off my 1978 copy of Our Bodies Ourselves, underlined key passages in the chapter entitled In America They Call Us Dykes, and I read coming out stories. I talked to my therapist and confided in a lesbian friend. I looked for lesbian meetups, attended DC Pride. I searched online dating sites and went so far as to write an ad and lost my nerve before I posted it. I still had not come out to my boys or my family. I told myself that I would do so when I had met someone and had something to tell. Still keeping things pretty buttoned up because, truthfully, I was afraid of how they would react. Would they see me as I really was and accept me, not be embarrassed? Would my boys still want me to be their mom? When I finally did come out to my boys after I met Colleen, their reactions were typical of who they are. Nate was unfazed, and Matt gave me a copy of the graphic novel memoir Fun Home by Alison Bechdel to read. It's the story of a lesbian and her closeted father. Not exactly the same situation, but I appreciated the sentiment. He brought me up short, however, when he asked, "What about Dad?" What about Dad? Dad, David, and I had been married for close to 20 years. What about Dad spoke to memories that couldn't be unmade. We had shared a house, a history, language, stories, children, promises, regrets. I was the same, but different, more vulnerable and humbled by the prospect of starting over, literally. The love and life I shared with their dad was as genuine as the love I now had for Colleen. My life changes were disruptive, and I had to live with the consequences of that disruption. But I couldn't live without the disruption. The reactions of my family of origin were decidedly mixed. "I never thought I would have a lesbian daughter," was repeated, chant-like, by my mother one evening when Colleen and I were visiting. I think her chanting may even have been accompanied by a rocking motion. Things got more interesting when, while I was out of the room looking for some family photos, my mother asked Colleen to explain how it all worked between women. Colleen calmly referred my mother's inquiring mind to the internet, and that ended that. But there were other reactions. One brother told me that if he saw pictures of me kissing my wife on Facebook, he would unfriend me. Another asked, "Who's the man in the relationship?" And one brother didn't bring up the subject at all, and still hasn't. I tell these stories not to call family members out for being insensitive. Okay, they were being insensitive. They were also trying to do something hard. It wasn't only about me. They needed time to adjust and pass through their own Elizabeth Kubler-Ross-like stages to get to, if not approval, then perhaps understanding. I was still a daughter, a sister, a godmother, an aunt, a mom, a partner, a colleague, a friend, the same but different, more honest, more settled, more content. And what about now? In May of 2012, Colleen and I stood before the division chief of the Marriage Bureau in the District of Columbia and exchanged vows before a small group of family and friends. For those of you keeping score, it was my third marriage and Colleen's first. A couple of years later, on the morning of Friday, June 26, 2015, Nate woke us in our hotel room in San Francisco, where I was attending a conference, to tell us that the Supreme Court had ruled by a 5-4 vote that the Constitution guarantees a right to same-sex marriage. He was so excited he could barely get the words out, telling me over and over again how happy he was for Colleen and me. Love wins, and to think I had ever doubted that. Each June, we celebrate LGBTQ+ Pride Month to recognize and celebrate the impact that lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and other individuals have had on our shared history and culture. Yet to me, a relative latecomer to this party, it means something more. It means standing up for yourself. It means opening yourself up to risk and disappointment. It means finding your voice and speaking out with that voice, and not only when it's safe to do so. It means telling yourself you can when everyone says you can't or shouldn't. And it means being self-seeking and self-loving. For if you do not know and love yourself, then how can you know and love others? Each of you has had and will continue to have challenging moments in your lives when you are faced with choices to go or stay, fight or fly. Those choices will be yours alone to make. And whether those choices are the right ones or not depends on who you are, the true you, the person you are when no one is looking. And while those choices may hurt, and the hurts may linger, as my dear friend Alex reminds me, a phoenix does indeed rise from the ashes, but first there have to be flames. I'll end with a quote from a hero of mine, a woman from an earlier time who felt the constraints of family, traditions, and expectations, and who was herself the subject of whispers and speculations. You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You are able to say to yourself, I have lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. Eleanor Roosevelt. Thank you for inviting me. Happy Pride.